welcome to SIG-Windows. It's a new year, January 2nd, 2024. Welcome everybody. Hope you had a happy new year. This is a SIG-Windows meeting. We are a CNCF project and we follow the CNCF guidelines. And so if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to any of us. But essentially boils down to being nice to everyone and being inclusive. So I think probably have a pretty light agenda today, since it's first day back for myself and I think for some other folks too. So I don't have any major announcements other than the SIG release did give out a draft for the next Kubernetes release, and so I don't have the dates on hand, but I did see it come through over like last week. So I think KEPs and things are due sometime towards the end of January. So keep an eye out and we'll update everybody as it comes forward again. So does anybody else have any other announcements? Okay, cool. Any new contributors want to say hello? No. Cool. Yeah, so I think on the agenda, we found a bug in one of our end-to-end tests, and we initially thought it was maybe a problem with the test, but a meme has been doing some awesome sleuth work and has tracked it down to an issue in container D. Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, if you want me to share, I wrote all the updates in the issue, like, so at the end of the issue, you have everything. You can just comment around that. So basically, the main issue where we start to find this is getting the kubelet node. You can get the stat summary and get like the information about the metrics in your node using this endpoint. So we found out that sometimes in container D17, the usage nanocores was returning 0 randomically. And we started to investigate that, and we started with the kubelet part, and I went down in the code path and found the issue was happening only on container D17 forward. So 1.6 until 1.6.26, as the latest version, it was not existent. So I start to take a look in the code of container D and find out one new function that is trying to calculate this new usage nanocores. So basically, it gets the current timestamp, the usage nanoseconds that comes from the kernel, and caches these. And every new request, it compares the values. And in the middle of this get usage nano calculations, it does a subtraction between these two values. So when these two values are equal, the value is 0. And it can happen when you have like more than one request going on in the same endpoint. So if you start the object that has this cache is shared to everyone in this endpoint. So if you do a request in the same endpoint, you end up with one of the requests at 0. So I found out there is something that's pulling this endpoint at each 10 seconds. And eventually you end up with a 0 value in this return. So I don't know what the solution is right now, because this is something that's a shared cache. I don't think I found a few logs around that won't probably solve the issue of adding more logs on that. But I think if you have more granularity in this information of the cache, somehow like microseconds but this is coming from the kernel, so I don't know.
One question.
Sure.
So let me get you straight. Basically, the issue is that it gets 2 requests very soon and basically compares to subsequent measurements. and it basically does a delta time, right?
Yeah. Can you open the
Y-
function here to clarify, James? There is a link.
So I don't know if you know, but we've known about an issue on Windows that basically says that time measurements on Windows are not granular at all. Meaning that if you try to measure time sooner than a window of like 10 milliseconds, you'll always get the same timestamp. So if you do basically two time.nows subsequent, you'll get a difference of 0. So it might happen that, you know, you try to measure the usage between two timestamps. Of course, you get a 0 delta time, which means that you basically have the same CPU usage.
Yep. That, that
That's
that's exactly the issue.
that's a very old Windows issue which has been addressed and not been addressed in so many times.
So,
Basically,
but we're also
there's
seeing this on Linux as well, though.
oh really? I
Yeah.
mean, on Linux is a bit more fine-grained when it comes to time measurements, but I think it impacts more Windows. But basically, historically, you could update the time resolution on Windows, but that would also up the power consumption of the node, which might not be something that you want. And also, as far as I know, there's an interesting tidbit is that Google Chrome, what it does, it actually increases that time resolution for whenever it has to scroll. So you get a really, really smooth transition and then changes it back. But it's a global variable parameter on the system, which basically is going to impact every single application on the system. So that's one of the reasons why this thing was never fixed properly on Windows. It's complicated.
Go ahead, Avram.
Yeah, so James, I just want to, you had mentioned that we're seeing this on Linux also. So what exactly are we seeing on Linux also? Is it that when you do two timestamps back to back, it's there's no change, or we're seeing this issue that Amin found on Linux also?
We are seeing, I observed this on Linux as well. It's less frequent, but if you do like different requests, you end up with 0 in some of them directly in the endpoint. But the difference that on Kubernetes, CAdvisor override this value. So you don't see these on the stats summary endpoint on Linux.
I see,
I
yeah.
guess
Because if I look at the issue, right, it took me a while to, now that you've pointed it out, I can see that, you were seeing this on Linux. I think we should really call it out, because what the Continuity folks have done is they've added that this is a Windows only issue at the moment, right? So we should clearly call out that this is also happening on Linux.
1 second. At one point, I have been doing some experiments regarding, time measurements on Windows, and I think I also measured it on Linux, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to find the issue where I reported that. Pum, pum, pum. I'll post the issue in chat when I find it.
Cool. Well, I don't think we need to necessarily solve it today. So, but that's a great point, is to make sure that we are tag the right folks to make sure that we're aware that this is a Linux bug as well, to get some extra eyes on it. So yeah, we can leave it at that. Just want to let people know, if you're using 1.7 and you're seeing some strange behavior, could be this. Could be this if you're using the HBA. Any other comments on this particular issue? During triage today, we did notice that SIG-Windows containerd nightly job is failing. Started failing on the 22nd of December, or the 23rd. And so it looks like there's a couple commits around Windows and a new snapshotter, and so it may be related to that. Not 100% sure yet, but just wanted to call that out for anybody that's keeping track of those things. And then image updates. Who added this one?
I added this one. I was trying to set up the cluster before the Christmas break, and I realized that the images are there are no images for the latest Calico, I think. So there is no 3.27 one.
Yeah, I think that got released like right before I went on vacation.
I imagine, yeah.
So, and I think my intent is to not update those in SIG-Windows tools, but to move towards using Calico upstream at this point, because they have stable support for post-process containers based on what we did in SIG-Windows tools. And so I don't want to maintain two separate things. And so my intent would be to transition people towards that space now that SIG-Windows tools has come out. Yeah, Pedro, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Apologies for being late. Yeah, I'm a Calico developer. I've been working on that. I want to say, yeah, we released Calico 3.27. I think in the week before the last of last year. So yeah, it's pretty recent. And yes, I'd appreciate any feedback if we have any issues, but we should be supporting it upstream. We're pointing to the SIG-Windows tools, bootstrapping scripts that install containerd and kubelet, but otherwise, yeah, Calico operators should just install on Windows fine right now with host process containers.
Okay, cool. And do you have like a link to the documentation on how to do that? Like that'll be one of my things I'm going to do for Cluster API for Azure is
sure thing. Where should I put it?
You post
over
it here. I
chat?
can get it into the
Okay, we'll do.
I'll put it in
One
the
sec.
docs. And
Yeah,
you said,
yeah, sorry, carry on. I mean, sorry. Can I? Just a quick one. I just realized that my problem comes from the fact that I'm trying to follow the guide in the SIG-Windows tools, right? So there is this guides and Calico markdown file, and this guide refers to those host process related manifests. So I think, I'm sure this guide needs to be updated. I could try to update it myself, following the official Calico documentation, if they're getting rid of those host process containers.
yeah, I mean, for the most part, I would say just point at the Calico docs for everything that we can for like the Calico side of things, on how to install it. And then yeah, I don't, it sounds like, Pedro, you said you're still using the containerd install script and the kubelet bootstraps, or like the node bootstrap script.
Yeah, we're pointing to your scripts on master.
Okay.
Cool. But yeah, otherwise, I think, yeah, the best way to go would be to point at the Calico docs for that.
Matthias, yes, I think that section is, from a brief, quick look, looks like the section that could potentially go. And I'll link this information in the docs here. We'll update the guide to point. Cool. Does that help, Matthias, or do you have other questions? Or
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I can try to clean up. I mean, I can clean up the docs and submit the pull request. No problem. I can do that. Yeah. Yeah, by the way, before the Christmas break, I tried to use this like a mixture of Calico 3.27 on the Linux on the master node and Calico 3.26 on the Windows node. It didn't really work for me, but perhaps I made some different mistakes. But mixing versions is supported. Is this something people?
No, really, no.
Okay, good.
I mean, if we don't have any like backwards compatibility issue, it might work, but yeah, we don't test it, don't support it.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
any other comments? All right. Lean take on software development tools. Who's this?
It's me. Yeah, it was me. I mean, we've been discussing some ideas with Amim and Aravind as well, and yeah, we are trying to work out the proof of concept. Actually, we've done it already, I think. How to improve the experience of those who may rely on or use this SWDT. To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't have any questions or any issues to raise and discuss. But yeah, I'm new here, so I don't know what are, like, Amim has ideas, Aravind has ideas, everyone has ideas and expectations from this project, and we kind of, I'm trying to find what's the grand direction, you know, where this project is supposed to be heading. Kind of this sort of issue I may have, but yeah, when I need when I need a concrete task around this project, then I go to Amim and I ask, okay, what should I do next? What do you think? And I do, and I try some things, but kind of I'm missing the grand goal of this project. So perhaps it's not to discuss it now and today, perhaps something to discuss over next couple of meetings, and I don't know. Yeah, but I'm interested to be contributor to this part of SIG-Windows, basically.
Arvind, go.
Yeah, so I think we can discuss the goal today itself, Matthias. The goal has always been, we need to give folks who are wanting to try out Windows containers on Kubernetes a local solution that doesn't involve them having to use a cloud provider, having to spend money basically to, try out Windows on Kubernetes. That is at a very high level. That's the basic goal. And then you start digging down, right? Initially, I think we had like these visions of like, hey, we run this tool, it does everything for us. It brings up a Linux VM, it brings up a Windows VM, it does configures the control plane, configures the Windows node, and you end up with a small cluster running on your laptop that you can now deploy Windows workloads on. And I think what typically has been happening in the past is we get bogged down in virtualization world, where we're trying to figure out, okay, do we use KVM? Do we use QEMU? Do we use Hyper-V? What are the platforms that we're supported? And I think what we really need to do is just pare it down a little bit and say, okay, we're going to target Linux and Windows. I know that there's folks want to do this on the newer Macs, and I think it's just harder to do it there. So what we need to do is I personally think we need to pare it down. If possible, even take the virtualization bits out of here and say, hey, we bring up a Linux control plane. And I think there was some discussion over using, kind, and then you bring up a Windows VM and then you configure it. And what I feel SIG-Windows DevTools should be doing is find some way to say, I'm pointing at this Windows VM, go and configure it. I think that should be our first step. Because the minute we think about, no, I'm going to help the customer or the user, the developer, bring up the Windows node event, that's where we start getting bogged down, and we are focusing more on the tooling to bring up the Windows VM rather than focusing on what is the configuration mechanism to take an existing Windows VM and make it a Kubernetes worker node. So that's my two bits. Yeah, other folks can speak up about this. So in some sense, I am not going to tell you, Matthias, hey, you should do X, Y, and Z, because these are the high level goals. And at that point, we all as a group can iterate on, how we could get to that. If folks think that, bringing it up as a VM needs to be included, we can discuss that. So I'll open the floor to other folks now.
I had my hand raised too, and I was going to say kind of the same thing. I was going to start off saying, I think like one of the kind of struggles was there were too many different competing goals all at once, or like a lot of like one grand goal that was trying to encompass like all of the different possible platforms, like an Ubuntu Linux VM versus like an M1 or M2 MacBook Pro. And because of that, I think like there was always kind of one goal, which I think Arvind did a good job summing up and saying it's like a way so that people can run a Kubernetes cluster, like Windows containers in Kubernetes cluster, and specifically or especially run some of the like the kubelet, a development version of the kubelet there, without requiring, going to Azure, AWS, or GKE and either spinning up a cluster and hacking up a node or just getting the VMs. But like, I think streamlining a vision or maybe targeting one specific or like one or two specific use cases or platforms and really focusing on those could, like, even that would be a big benefit.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a lot, and that's what I was actually asking for. And so over the Christmas break, I've done my homework, learning through all the landscape of available tools and comparing it to what I discussed with Amim. And for example, what still confuses me is apparently there are some solutions out there which are like something that this project is aiming to achieve. For example, I found this KubeKey solution, which is exactly like, you can create a cluster from a YAML configuration file, and in the YAML configuration file, you specify some details of nodes, and these nodes could be pre-provisioned. Like, here is the node for master, here's its IP, blah, 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 and create the cluster. And since I'm new to the whole ecosystem, I started wondering, okay, like why this kind of KubeKey or other similar solutions, there are more out there. Why this is like suggested, or maybe why SIG-Windows does not integrate with these tools, but tries to create it like its own tool. So this was the puzzle for me, you know. But of course, these tools like KubeKey, they do much more than what the SIG-Windows DevTools. What is the promise behind the SIG-Windows DevTools? SIG-Windows DevTools, in my opinion, should be very simple tools, simple to maintain, simple to use. It shouldn't be like, you know, too many features in it. But anyway, eventually with Amim, we discussed that something like setting a tool that could set up the cluster on pre-provisioned VMs given to the tool via a configuration file by a user. Something like that would be the goal. What do you think? Do you have any experience with KubeKey or similar things? I mean, has it been considered? Yeah.
Yeah. So Matthias, there are like KubeKey is just one example, right? There are many such. What we call is, you know, there are a bunch of tools that help you bring up Kubernetes clusters. And have we looked at every one of them and decided we cannot integrate? I don't think so. But I think some level of effort has happened. And so why we decided to do the way, you know, SIG-Windows DevTools is, we are trying to keep it as native as possible, which is basically use kubeadm as much as we can. So there is no reason why we shouldn't integrate with KubeKey, but you will find that it's not a gimme. It's not like a low-hanging fruit, because if it was, I think we would have gotten to this earlier. So that's the reason why we haven't. I'm not saying we shouldn't use KubeKey or we should use KubeKey. I think you folks, you and Amim are on the right track. You're basically saying, bring up a control plane, use kind or local up cluster or something. Bring up a local, you know, control plane, and then you have a pre-provisioned Windows VM that you're going to add to this cluster. I think that should be the goal. And I think Amim has also looked at what Red Hat has, the Windows machine config operator, to sort of, you know, even do the configuration of that node. And that was the philosophy that we followed at Red Hat when we wanted to configure Windows nodes, is basically not be connected to any cloud, but, you know, a generic sort of solution. But there are some hard-coded dependencies inside the operator, which can be a problem. But yeah, we could use any one of these solutions. I think it was James who did some work helping someone with adding like a Windows node to a Minikube cluster. So there are options out there, Matthias. What I would like us to see is we pick a direction and we stick to it and we drive it to completion. What has happened in the past is we look at the next shiny object that comes in, and then we go behind it, and then we run into, because it's not easy. None of these things, you know, is easy. And then we give up, and then we, you know, shift to another one. So I think moving forward, we pick a direction and we drive it to completion is what I would suggest. Go ahead, Mark.
I'll also add, well, two things. One of them is, I think, like, one of the goals specifically, and even why DevTools is in the name, is because hang on, let me go silent. Okay, was like, we wanted to be able to make sure we're testing new features as they, like, even before potentially they get merged and checked in. So we really wanted to make sure that we had the ability to bootstrap a cluster with, you know, a custom version of the API server that may know about some new feature flag that's not there, with a kubelet on Windows to do that. So that's one of the goals, was to support that, and I do think we should maintain that. Like, a lot of there's a lot of different solutions out there which may work, but I think it's important to pick one that at least lets you create, like, bring up the cluster with custom components, because, like, this is one of the goals was to help us all out as developers to developing, is to The other thing that I wanted to add was I believe that one of the initial goals was to do the bootstrapping of the VM as well. Like we've got scripts and guides for how to take a Windows VM once you have it, and you know, set up containerd, make sure your CNI is set up and all of that, and then like run kubeadm and point it at a cluster. But we found that those guides were both kind of long, especially for people who are new into coming into Kubernetes, and also hard to maintain as kind of the ecosystem evolved to like and then we had to like, you know, pick certain versions of CNIs, make sure those supported and were supported in the cluster and all that too. And really that piece of bringing up a VM and managing it like through whatever we were doing, VirtualBox, and having to maintain images that could boot on Ubuntu. That's one of the reasons where I think, or one of the areas where the project kind of went sideways, and there was just too many different roads to take and too many different exploratory things to do that too. So like, I'm not saying that has to be one. I think one of the goals should be make developer scenarios easier. I don't know if we should stick with it and say like one of the goals is to do the VM provisioning too. If there's another tool that works best for that, that we could, you know, piggyback off of and say, you know, like, we don't want to maintain a huge guide about how to, you know, install a virtualization platform for the developer tools, figure out where to get the Windows image, boot up the Windows image, or like, and then start configuring. But if there's other ways where we can streamline that process and then just kind of tack on the last step of Kubernetes specific cluster stuff and then joining it to the cluster, that would also be great. And I know like there's some other tools like the K3S agent and stuff that there's a lot of things that I think have different avenues that we could explore.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That makes sense, of course. Yeah, when I said that the user gives a VM, pre-provisioned VM, I meant Windows, of course, and I meant a VM which is operating system Windows installed on a VM, but the VM is plain clean, right? So there's nothing Kubernetes or containerd or CNI specific on it. AMIM was experimenting with a QEMU, and I've been exploring the libvirt thing to automate creating, bootstrapping the VM. Yeah, but it's a bit longer wait than I thought initially it will be for Windows VM. So just having a clean Windows VM handed me via a YAML configuration, then I can provision it with container and Kubernetes specific stuff from the tooling, basically. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, I realize that I'm asking very basic questions and making this meeting longer than it's necessary. But if you have any, like, if you see any wrong directions I'm taking or heading to, then I ask for corrections. Let's say, yeah.
No, I'd say thank you for taking a look at this and bringing some clarity. I was going to suggest, I don't know if this makes sense, but maybe it makes sense at this point, since you've been doing some research, is to just put together like a one-page document that says like, here's some of the options. And then we could review that at like a future meeting that says, you know, yeah, this would meet these goals, like outline our goals, outline a few options, and say which ones meet which options. And it might just streamline the conversation. Not spend tons of time on like huge crazy design document, but like just writing it down so that we have that somewhere. And I find that helps the ideas solidify a little bit. So
yeah, I would even suggest something similar to a enhancement, and we don't need to put it in the Kubernetes repo. Even we could even put it inside like our SIG-Windows tool or DevTools repo that just states, you know, the goal and basically the stuff that we discussed today, so that it's put down somewhere
Okay, I'll try to write something for the next meeting. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the end of the meeting. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you next week. All right. Bye.
Bye, folks.
Bye, folks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.